I am going to turn it over to Samer, who is going to introduce our guest speaker for today. Samer is a wonderful part of the Hackforge community. We first met a little over a year ago now through some other, I think, community activists. I think David was the one who really brought us together, Samer, and I'm so glad that he did. I tell a lot of people about your product, so please make sure to mention that to everyone. I want to get the word out there about the work that you do as well. So from here, I'm going to pass it to you, Samer, and then you can kind of take it over. If you need anything, though, I am here. Let me know.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Um, Lauren, you do phenomenal work in our community. We are very grateful for you for everything that you do. I'm Salman Mansour. I'm the founder of Be Aware, the Deaf Assistant. We have tools that help the deaf and hard of hearing community. And that before I worked on Be Aware, I have been doing a lot of accessibility consulting work in the digital space. And I got to work with a lot of people with different disabilities, and I have been so blessed that I've been able to do this work. That being said, today we have we're incredibly fortunate to be joined by two of the leading voices in the field that we're speaking about today. So we have Dr. Treviranus and Cindy Lee. They've spent their careers pushing technology to be more inclusive, ethical, and human-centered. Dr. Treviranus is the director of the Inclusive Design Research Center at OCAD University, and she is a global authority in digital inclusion. I can definitely say that. She's super well connected. She's played a very pivotal role in shaping international accessibility standards and is currently leading Canada's effort to create a national standard on accessible and equitable AI. So the standard that we talked about just yesterday in our group review. And joining her is Cindy Lee. She's a senior inclusive developer at the Inclusive Design Research Center as well. And she's incredibly experienced as well. For over a decade, Cindy has been building tools that center people with disabilities. So from accessible content management systems to AI systems that help individuals communicate more effectively. She's also been working on mitigating bias in LLMs, something that we were trying to figure out yesterday. And she's trying to ensure that marginalized communities are not excluded by algorithmic decision making. So together, they'll walk us through the promises and pitfalls of AI and share highlights from the technical guide and invite us uh, into an open dialogue on how we can build systems that reflect the full diversity of human experience. Please welcome me joining Dr. Treviranus and Cindy Lee.
Thank you, and thank you, Samer and Lauren. It's a pleasure to be here and to speak on this really critical and timely topic. It's wonderful that you've actually reviewed the standard, and hopefully we can have a fairly productive conversation after this presentation. I invited Cindy to join me because she is the person that can bring a lot of the practical and specific information about how to support accessible and equitable AI from a developer perspective. But we'll also talk about how you can help in terms of advocacy and policy. To begin with, for those of you that benefit from a visual description, I'm an older woman, older white woman with gray short hair and glasses. And I'm currently actually sitting in my daughter's house because the roofers were in my house. And so I'm using a single screen, and I've had to do this kludgy thing of sharing only a portion of my screen, which is why you saw my first slide right from the beginning. But I am with both my house and my daughter's house are in the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat. I am going to be showing slides, and there will be graphics, but I'll be sure to voice all the text and to describe the graphics that I have in the slides. And I will give the slides as well to Lauren and Samar so that you can share them with whoever wishes to have the slides. So what I want to talk about is AI and disability and the somewhat problematic but also a beneficial relationship between disability and AI. One of the things that we've known in our close to 40 years, or actually more than 40 years of working in this field, is that any disruptive technology is felt, the extremes of any disruptive technology are felt by people with disabilities. If you have a disability, then you both feel the greatest risks, but also the greatest opportunities. And this is especially the case with AI. I'll tell you two scenarios. The one is AI offers the sublime and life-changing opportunities. One example of this is I just traveled with a friend of mine who's blind to Vienna, and I've traveled with her quite a bit before, and usually I'm the describer. I have to share with her the experiences and explain everything, and I'm not actually a very good travel, I guess, tourist describer, etc. But I try my best. And this time, the situation was completely switched. Her smart glasses gave an almost poetic description of our surroundings, including historic facts, reading and translating the text that neither of us could understand, and helping us find landmarks we wanted to explore. So the roles were completely switched. And this is the case with many of the miraculous things that AI is doing when people are attempting to address barriers and translate the world, translate audio, translate visual information. And Samara, you've also, I understand, been working in this area as well. And hopefully we can explore some more of that towards the end of the discussion period. The other side of AI is the cruelty and inhumane treatment of people with disabilities that is happening as a result of AI. And how we've encountered this is by monitoring the harm and incident databases that have been springing up around the globe that track what are some of the things that are happening with people, or what are some of the harms that AI is doing. And unfortunately, people with disabilities face a heart-wrenching and depressingly disproportionate set of harms. Examples include, but are not complete, things like parents with disabilities falsely flagged as unfit and losing custody of their children, false positive tax audits, false positive security flagging at various security checkpoints, including airports, excluded from Optima filtering in employment and education, biased credit and asset rating, unfairly denied mortgages and loans, unfairly high insurance rates, deprioritization of relevant information in media and the news, and even iatrogenic death and illness, or death and illness due to the treatment rather than the illness, because medical calculators are being used and insurances are denying payment of anything but what the AI determines. And then, worst of all, as AI is being used in battle, people with disabilities tend to be collateral damage more than anyone else. And the reason for this, and I'll explain later, but unfortunately, at its most benign, and we'll talk about some of the benign effects, but also some of the more extreme effects, AI can be a highly seductive form of digital eugenics. AI in its present form is the ultimate adage of be careful what you wish for. It's poised to make everything worse for people who are struggling the most and everything better for people who are already doing well, even among people with disabilities. AI at its most basic is a statistical reasoning machine feeding on available data. And it can be seen as a power tool, like moving from a hammer and chisel to a powerful motor. It can do the things that we've done before, but more accurately, consistently, and efficiently. It is amazing at mechanizing, accelerating, amplifying, and automating existing patterns. It can statistically find or produce the typical, popular, normative, predictable, and statistically average patterns. And most people became aware of AI with the emergence of ChatGPT, but AI, of course, has been around and deployed for decades. When people feel daunted by the complexity of AI, I like to emphasize that people still control AI and characterize it as three generations of how people command AI. In the first generation, which is what is deployed in robotics, we said, here are the rules, follow them literally and accurately. And maybe during the discussion period, you can help tell us stories of television comedies that you watched where AI robotics did things far too literally, like throwing out the husband when the instruction was to keep the house clean. The second generation of AI was we said, here is available data, use statistical reasoning to optimize the selected metrics. And this is a form of AI that is deployed pervasively. And we'll talk about all of the places where it is making decisions for us and where humans are no longer making those decisions. And then the third generation, which is ChatGPT and Gen AI, we're saying, here's all the data we have. You figure it out and make new connections and determine weights based on past relationships and possible combinations. So we are slowly ceding more and more control to AI. And as I mentioned, most people became concerned and aware of AI when it reached the third generation. I'm actually more concerned about the pervasive deployment of that second generation AI in all our critical decisions. To understand my concern, you need to understand something about disability and data. Over the 44 years that I've been in the field, I've been collecting data. I've been asking everyone I encounter, or almost everyone I encounter, and some of you may have been asked the same question. What do you need to thrive and fully participate in society? And because this data set is so diverse and multifaceted, the only way I can plot this is using what is called a high dimension multivariate scatter plot. And when I plot it this way, the needs of any given population looks like a starburst, and I've dubbed this the human starburst. It's a normal distribution, many bell curves plotted together, or the pattern that Pareto noticed when he developed the 80-20 rule. Like a normal distribution, 80% of the needs are clustered in the middle 20% of the space. And the remaining 20% are distributed in the periphery in the remaining 80% of the space. And what you'll note is that the data points in the middle are close together, meaning they're more alike. And the data points at the periphery are further apart, meaning they're more different from each other. And you can probably guess where all of the needs related to disability are. They're out at that jagged edge. And because of economies of scale and conventions like the 80-20 rule that say to ignore the difficult 20% that take 80% of the effort, almost anything that is designed works for that middle 80%, is difficult to use as you deviate from the middle and doesn't work for you if you're out at the jagged edge. And the design of the AI ecosystem is no different. Any statistically determined prediction is highly accurate in the middle, inaccurate as you move from the middle, and wrong as you get to the edge. And this predates AI. It is the case for almost anything that is statistically determined. And AI, as I said, is simply amplifying, automating, and accelerating a pattern that already ripples through every aspect of our lives, creating greater and greater disparity. And when we think about the crises that our global society is in currently, a lot of it is due to that disparity, the inequalities that exist, and the resulting difficulty in dealing with other crises. So this pattern exists within our designs, who our designs are a fit for or a misfit for, the products that make it to market, the knowledge we recognize as scientific evidence based on quantified statistical power. Much of that knowledge applies to the majority, but does not apply to the minorities at the edge. Our education, which pushes towards standardized learners, our systems of employment, which attempt to create replaceable workers, and our systems of governance. For in defending democracy, we've often reduced the ideal democracy to one person, one vote, and majority rules without attention to human rights, which means that the critical needs of the marginalized minorities will be outweighed by the trivial needs of the majority. And this is the case, of course, in any majority rules decision making. Who are the winners and who are the losers? The losers tend to be those who have needs out at the periphery. And what we fail to take into account is that the only thing that is certain, actually, the only thing that can really be predicted is death and disability. We'll all, at some point in our life, experience disability ourselves or with someone we love. We will all have needs out at that jagged edge, which means that if we consider the hugely diverse margins, we leave room for change and growth when the unexpected happens. And believe me, there's going to be a lot of unexpected things that have happened. You can all probably name some in the past few years. And innovation is actually found at that outer edge, not the complacent middle. The people at the edge are the first to detect the weak signals of crises to come because, of course, disparity and exclusion are vicious cycles. If you are experiencing one form of exclusion, you're likely to experience another. And so you're likely to be the first to be vulnerable to any of the cracks, whether it's in the UX design or in the digital ecosystem that are likely to occur. So the knowledge space that we need to know about and that we need to attend to is not that complacent middle, but the 80% of the unexplored knowledge space. The extreme opportunities of AI frequently mean that people with disabilities are the poster child of AI. We're used to justify the risks. And a common theme voiced by leading developers, again now, even though there was that push for a 6-month pause on AI, related to the geopolitical and economic AI imperative is trust us to break things, to make mistakes, to push forward. And unfortunately, even in Canada now, we have a minister of AI where Canada is sort of hooking our hopes on pushing forward with that AI. And I'm hoping that you can help to make sure that we take advantage of the opportunities without bearing the risks. To have the right to ask this of us, you need to have a deeper understanding of the relationship between disability and technology. There's a saying for most people, technology makes things convenient. If you have a disability, technology makes things possible. And therein lies that awesome responsibility. Technology is relied upon by people with disabilities to speak, read, write, learn, affect the world, navigate the world, eat, express love, remember, plan, breathe, and even live. Our relationship to technology by necessity is more intimate. It is essential because we have no choice. It is what makes things possible. And this relationship also makes us more vulnerable. We should not have to give our trust to a potentially abusive partner. We're disproportionately vulnerable to the mistakes and to the breaking. And beyond guarding our homes, it's implanted in our brains and in our vital organs. It's undeniable, though, that AI offers extreme opportunities for everyone, and these can make life-changing differences for people with disabilities. Of course, you've probably all experienced some of these advantages, recognizing speech patterns, gestures, finding a target object or pattern, matching and labeling objects, remembering forever and reminding on time, sorting possible paths to find an optimum, detecting common mistakes and correcting them. How many of you remember how to spell or remember how to do good grammar, given that we've been relying on all these AI tools? AI is very good at mechanizing the formulaic. It is promoted to act as robotic personal service workers, create intelligent prosthetics, restore vision, and even read your mind through your EEG pattern. Next week, I'll be in Banff and at a meeting of the Brain-Computer Interface Initiative, and it's a massive conference now. A new assistive technology is announced almost every week. Among the current functions, and this is a very, very incomplete list, I didn't get a chance to update this. There's AI for image to text description, real-time captioning, sound filtering, voice control, personal voice output, exoskeleton optimization, gesture control, and I'll share my slides and perhaps a list of the many links, and Samara can probably provide quite a few additional ones. There's smart home systems and robotic assistance, memory and recall like Rewind AI, simplification and summation like Tangle AI, writing support like ChatGPT, and as I mentioned, BCI or brain-computer interfaces. There are also assessment tools, accessibility evaluation tools, accessibility repair tools, and research tools. So they're and I'm sure even as we speak today, there will be a newly announced AI tool that will be helpful. But even with these extremely helpful, life-changing systems, there are some flies in the ointment. Amongst them is that AI makes people vulnerable to privacy breaches, and data sharing agreements often extend to third parties with undeclared motives. How many of you have actually read the legalese before you hit I agree? Video capture systems surveil the users and others surrounding the user, and apps often come with targeted advertising. The AI pushes the users towards stereotypical responses or behaviors, which means that you lose your individuality and your individual quirkiness and differentiation. So high school students using the system have said that the pressure to be typical is increased because AI can hide that uniqueness. Does it make it harder for people who can't use or afford the AI? Does it decrease the tolerance for personal quirks and differences? Right. Also, the benefit of these amazing AI systems are inverse to the need. It works the worst for people that need it the most. If your speech is further from the average, if you're blind and the environments you're in is poor, or the product labels you want to identify are in a non-English language, in the workplace, it's often assumed that an AI tool will work for everyone with a given disability, not recognizing that the effectiveness is variable. Many employers have said to me, well, wait a sec, we don't need to do this because there's another employee who's blind who can use AI. Why does this particular individual require these additional accommodations? Because much of the intelligence is in the cloud, these systems consume a great deal of bandwidth, and this is not a cost that most disability financial benefit programs recognize, not to mention the environmental costs of AI. And think about the Portugal and Spain blackouts, which have been attributed to AI. Also, the goal of AI is to sound believable. It isn't to tell the truth. It produces believable boast or pastiche. It sounds most confident when it repeats stereotypes. And the believable untruths can be quite hurtful. After all, what is the data we have fed AI about disability? It's a horrifying cocktail of ableist slurs, disabled people seen as inferior, unattractive, tragic victims suffering. There are plenty of bad jokes involving disability. And then we have benevolent ableism, or what has been called inspiration porn, um, where people with disabilities are pictured as these heroic individuals that are overcoming adversity. But the protections against these tend to backfire. Captioning toxicity filters that replace words deemed to be toxic with misleading, innocuous words prevent students who need captioning from understanding topics on sensitive subjects. This has certainly happened at OCAD when we talked about the sex trade or any topic that have anything to do with, say, sex, or use profane language, or use or talk about any topic. Try swearing at your AI system. People with facial differences have also been deemed toxic and canceled from Instagram. And there's many other examples where toxicity filters have gone awry. But I'm also worried about another extreme risk of AI. AI, I think, is constructing an infrastructure of statistical discrimination. And there's a story that I've told quite often. It actually happened back in 2013, which means that it's almost 12 years ago, and Cindy may remember some of this. But it's regarding my first alarm. I first began using AI back in the 80s, and I was using it to create a hidden Markov model to recognize dysarthric speech. And I was pulled back into AI when the Ministry of Transportation here in Ontario was celebrating its 100th anniversary. And they asked us to test a number of autonomous vehicle machine learning models that would be used to guide vehicles through busy intersections. I decided to test them with an unexpected scenario. And this is a friend of mine who moves backwards with her wheelchair. She's very fast and efficient, but very erratic. Other people who encounter her in intersections often think she's lost control and try to push her back to the curb she's come from. All the AI systems I tested chose to proceed. And if they had been deployed, they would have run her over. All of the AI systems developers said, don't worry, these are immature systems. We don't have enough data about people in wheelchairs in intersections. Come back when we've trained them with more data. And in fact, they oversampled the data related to people in wheelchairs and intersections. But when I came back to test those systems with these smarter AI systems that had filled the data desert regarding disability, they decided to run her over with greater confidence. They were confident that people in wheelchairs moved forward, and therefore the autonomous vehicle could proceed. And this is the main point of that particular story. Much of what you hear when you hear about AI bias and what needs to be done to protect people with disabilities talks about filling the data desert, making sure that people with disabilities are proportionally represented in data sets. But even if that were possible, the AI would still not attend to the outlier. It would use statistical reasoning to determine what is the most likely situation and decide with that likely situation. This is of greatest concern when AI is used to find, match, sort, label, measure, optimize, calculate, analyze people at scale. There's a problem with how AI is designed, and with people with disabilities are the ones most vulnerable to the harm caused. Because we're at the edges of every other justice-deserving group, people with disabilities are often collateral damage in the emerging AI race. Bias towards an optimal pattern means bias against difference. And of course, if you have a disability, you epitomize difference, different ways of doing the job, different digital traces, different work and education histories, different social media topics, an entangled profile of many differences. And bias towards the optimal pattern means this bias against you. AI is propagating the discrimination that was there faster, more efficiently, and more accurately. And it is homogenizing towards a monoculture. And if there's anyone with Irish heritage there, you know that monocultures don't survive. It can be felled by a single blow. And this pattern is happening everywhere. With all our life-altering difficult decisions, AI is used by over 90% of organizations in hiring, according to the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunities Commission, which unfortunately has now been shuttered in the U.S. And I don't know how many of you heard the CBC story yesterday about how AI interviews people in hiring situation. It's being applied and offered to competitive academic admissions departments, to beleaguered health providers in the form of medical calculators and emergency triage tools, to policing, to parole boards, to immigration and refugee adjudicators, to tax auditors, to loans and mortgage officers, and to security departments. As AI gets better or more accurate in its identification of the optima in hiring or admissions, for example, AI gets more discriminatory and better at eliminating applicants that don't match the optima in some way. I'm sure many of you are using productivity tools such as Microsoft Viva or Bossware in your employment, and all of that data contributes towards building out a much more granular pattern of what is average and what is not average. And this leads to, of course, bad, unfair, inaccurate decisions. And if you're an outlier, you're also subject to false flagging in suspicion systems, such as fraud detectors or security systems when traveling, which, of course, has come out in our monitoring of those harm and incident databases. At a community level, we have evidence-based investment by governments, AI guiding political platforms, public health decisions, urban planning, emergency preparedness and security programs, and none will decide with the marginalized outliers, and outliers will be marked as security risks. And these are some monumental decisions, life-changing decisions, but even the smaller, seemingly inconsequential decisions can harm by a million cuts. What gets covered by the news, what products make it to market, the recommended route provided by the GPS. How many of you have tried to get a GPS to tell you the accessible route, unless it's actually a product that is intended to do that? The priority given to supply chain processes, what design features make it to market. And of course, this harm predates AI. Statistical reasoning as the means of making decisions does harm. It does harm to anyone not like the statistical average or the statistically determined optima. And so this is why I'm saying if we don't do something about this, we're creating an infrastructure of digital eugenics, assuming that what we know about the majority applies to the minority does harm. And unfortunately, one of the things that I'm more concerned about now as well is the systems that are being used to protect people with disabilities or to protect against harm. Because it's more than addressing data gaps, more than removing human bias from algorithms, and more than removing stereotypes from labels and proxies that are used to label the data and to determine what might be the optima. The systems that are intended to remove bias and prevent harms use statistical reasoning as well. One of the things that you'll note if you do a search on AI ethics, it's a burgeoning industry. And many of these companies are certifying AI as ethical without actually considering the risks to outliers. The harms to people with disabilities are insignificant when determining impact metrics and thresholds and impact assessment, and risk-benefit assessors have shown that it would take many outlying fatalities to signal a significant risk in error testing and risk-benefit analysis tools. While it works for other discriminated identities such as gender or race, there are no bounded data clusters for disability to make cluster comparison effective. Self-identification doesn't work very well because of the stigma that is frequently associated with disability, and many people don't self-identify. So the specific risks will be dismissed as anomalies and merely anecdotes, even though they're hugely critical. And unfortunately, while many have focused on privacy, the reality is that privacy protections also don't work if you're different. While people with disabilities are most vulnerable to data abuse and misuse, the systems that we've implemented here in Canada, de-identification as source, doesn't work if you're highly unique. You will be re-identified, especially when data is aggregated. Differential privacy, which removes the helpful data specifics that you need to make the AI work for you, and your unique needs, is the alternative. And of course, this means that we're not going to really push AI to serve the individuals out at that edge. And unfortunately, the situation is that most people with disabilities have already bartered their privacy for essential services. When the choice is between giving away your personal data versus getting the services that you need to stay alive and to continue to function, you're going to choose those essential services. So we need to go beyond privacy, assume there will be breaches, and create systems to prevent data abuse and misuse. We need to ensure transparency regarding how data is used, by whom, and for what purpose. But getting back to the less sort of bleak story, I think the gift of AI is that it offers us a magnifying mirror of our current conventions and assumptions, giving us an opportunity to reflect on our trajectory as a society. Do we wish to speed in the direction our society is currently moving? Or do we need to reconsider these many conventions that we're now amplifying using AI? And getting to how are we addressing trustworthy AI at the IDRC? And I'm going to pull in Cindy in a second, but just as an overview to give you some sense of our processes at the Inclusive Design Research Center. I know that many of you are designers and you're probably familiar with the design thinking squiggle. And in the design thinking squiggle, I have that represented on the screen at the moment. What happens is you iterate to think about a variety of possibilities, and then you competitively reduce to a winning formula through those iterative processes. And that is the winning iterative formula for good is what is then scaled and replicated throughout. One of the problems that we find with that is that where there are winners, there's generally losers. And the individuals that are out at that outer edge are generally the losers because, of course, decision processes are usually done by consensus and majority rules. And when it's decided with the majority or the people that feel the greatest or that will have the largest number of people impacted, then those outliers are the ones that lose. So what we implement instead is what we call the virtuous tornado, where what we're doing is we're trying to create a system that stretches to address as many needs as possible. We're creating adaptive, flexible system that will have greater longevity and that can adapt to the unexpected changes that come. And we've developed what we call the Canadian School of Inclusive Design, and we have a master's program and soon to have a doctoral program in this area. And the origin is in digital accessibility. For those of you familiar with universal design, which was developed within architecture and within industrial design, we thought that digital systems would give us an opportunity to move from one size fits one that you need to do when you say have a doorway to one size. Um, I mean, from one size fits all, which happens in a doorway, to one size fits one, because digital systems are so mutable. And we design with and by people experiencing the greatest barriers, because they're also, and we also use those individuals as the indicators of success. So it isn't by numbers or by statistics we determine that our designs are working, but rather have we reached as far out in that human starburst as we possibly can. And we try to change the game, not just invite people to the game, and integrate and change the system to benefit everyone. And this is expressed in our 3 dimensions of inclusive design, which I won't go through right now, but I can share with you. So, what are some of the things we do to address statistical discrimination? We try to flip the perspective. Cindy created this amazing inverted word cloud. Many of you have probably participated in a word cloud exercise where someone asks a question, then everybody submits a response, and the most common words move to the middle and they grow in size, so everybody attends to them and piles on with those popular words. What we've done is we've inverted it so the novel, unique words go to the middle and grow in size. We are also playing with inverting dominant algorithms when you're selecting possible employees or students for admission, pushing from data exploitation to data exploration, from homogenization to diversification. And we're creating tools to reduce harm by signaling when a model will be wrong or unreliable because the person being decided about is far from the mean or average in the training data of the model. And we're creating a technical specification for this together with the Standards Council of Canada. And we've been playing with algorithmic more sort of art pieces and design pieces like the Lawnmower of Justice, where we remove the top of the Gaussian curve by not allowing any more than a certain number of repeats of any data element, such that the model needs to attend to the more of the periphery of the data. And we're pushing the models to where they're needed the most by creating language models for people that are non-speaking, children and adults who use a symbol-based semantic shorthand to communicate, starting at the edges for greater innovation. And then lastly, for those of you who attended yesterday's session, we're also trying to fill the regulatory vacuum with a regulatory standard for the Accessible Canada Act called the Accessible and Equitable AI Standard to be referenced in the EU as well. And here there are 4 parts. A nothing without us part, which ensures that AI systems are accessible and people with disabilities can participate in all roles related to AI, not just as consumers, but also as producers. A part that talks about equitable AI, protecting against all of those inequities that occur or that can happen with AI. A part about organizational processes that support accessible and equitable AI, and a part about education, ensuring that people are educated about accessible and equitable AI, and that AI education is accessible to people with disabilities. And specific to disability, in addition to the accessibility, we had tried to address statistical discrimination, cumulative harm, and of course the education portion. And the draft standard is available, and we will share a link to that. Cindy's going to talk a little bit about some other possibilities for how to address equitable AI. including, and I'll turn it over to Cindy, and you can tell me when to go to the next screen. I haven't showed Cindy these slides, so she's she's sort of dumped in the middle of this. Sorry about that. Go ahead. Cindy, do you want to unmute yourself? Yeah.
Oh, yes, yeah, sure. Okay, thank you for putting me on the spot. So right now, we are working on a project that's to use the AI tools to help people with disabilities to communicate better and faster with other people. So in those cases, we are using on-device models. So which means we are using small language models. So the model right now we are choosing is using a Llama 3.17 billion model. So which has a good balance between the power and the memory and resource requirement for devices. So for running those on-device models, so apparently the benefits Jutta is showing in the slides. So in that case, your data, the user's data won't leave your device. So it protects users' privacy and user-specific data. So you don't have to worry to send it to a cloud for processing and losing some of your sensitive data, losing the control of your sensitive data. So, and also when we run those on-device small models, they only require limited compute powers and memory so that it's able to run locally. So, but also there's a disadvantage of having those on-device models. So one disadvantage is you have to maintain a broad range of devices. So for example, when you run things on mobile devices, and there's Android, there's also iOS. So, and for computer types, there's different types of computers like Mac system or Windows system. So it will be a little bit harder to maintain a broad range of devices in that case. So Jutta, so can we move to, all right. So the next direction we are looking into is personalized models. So when we work with people with disabilities, they have different level of disability. So, and usually people with one disability has multiple disabilities. So they may have limited motor ability, there's a cognitive disability and combined disabilities. So every user may have their own specific needs. So when it comes to our project, where we use the language model to help people with disability, so we want to fine tune the model with personalized data so that this model understands this person's unique communication style and can personalize towards this person's needs. So the pros and cons are also listed here. The benefit is very obvious. So it can serve unique needs of a person. So, but it's also harder to test and maintain because every model is unique. So there's different specific attributes in that personalized model. So you have to write some unique tests for testing personalized model. And also, when you do the testing, when you have to be careful with the sensitive data that person provides you. So when you do the fine tuning, when you use this person's data, you have to anonymous use this sensitive data for that part. Okay. So right. So this page is more about what you should check for bias and unfairness in your model before you deploy. So number one is as a part of the testing, we need to integrate bias checks, and also we need to do the fairness audits frequently, even after you have deployed your system. You still should do periodically fairness audits. And regarding the data set we use for fine tuning, you also need to make sure your data set has eliminate the bias. So it has balanced data to represent the underrepresented groups.
Sorry, Cindy. Yeah. Um,
mhm.
I should have shown Cindy these slides ahead of time, but I'm hoping that we can explore these topics a little bit more. We ha in the remaining time, and I understand that we have until 12:30, right? Is that right? Great. Okay, so get your questions ready. I haven't been able to monitor the chat because I only have this one screen, but I'm hoping that there are plenty of questions and we can tell you more about some of the tactics that we have. I also want to recruit you as advocates, even if you're not developers, because we're at this pivot point here in Canada at the moment, where uh, of course, geopolitically, there has been a withdrawal from any AI protections in the US. And before the January 20th, actually on November 6th, I was at a meeting with the US Access Board and a number of the larger development companies. And the evening before the election, everyone was very, very attentive and cooperative and wanted to help us out. And then the next day, you could just see the switch had flipped, and much of what we were fearing at that time actually has happened. The U.S., which has most of the large companies, has withdrawn from many of the protective systems. We are, of course, working still with a number of states and cities to produce state-based protections. One notable group is the New York City Bar Association, which is trying to create model regulations that and standards that can be deployed within states that are willing to push against the inequities and discrimination that is happening. But here in Canada, we now have an AI or a minister of AI, and we're hoping that to make that Minister of AI aware of both the benefits and the harms that can happen if we don't design the AI so that we attend to people who tend to be extremely different and who tend to be outliers, including people with intersectional needs. Because what I've been talking about is disability, but there anything that pushes you away from the average of the data set is likely to also come with these discriminatory effects. And what we're hoping is that we can move AI forward at the speed of trust. And one of the things that we have learned through the work at the IDRC is any intelligence, whether it is human intelligence or machine intelligence, that actually attends to and works with our human scatter plot or the edges of our human scatter plot is able to adapt to change and respond to the unexpected. And we're going to have a lot of unexpected things, detect risk better, transfer to new contexts, results in greater dynamic resilience and longevity, will reduce disparity. And we're hoping that it may hold the key to our survival. And we're going to share a number of these links that we have, including to the Accessible Canada site that has the standard, our IDRC site, and everything we create is open access, openly licensed. So you can take it, you can put your name on it and claim it's yours. You can use it in whatever way you wish. And we have a WeCount site where we try to keep up to date with what's happening in AI and data and people with disabilities. And I have to acknowledge Accessible Standards Canada and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation for supporting us. And I'm going to stop sharing so you can we can take questions from everyone, and Cindy's going to help me answer.
Hey, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate that. So we do have a few items. Obviously, um, there's a lot that we have to reflect on, not just in terms of like how we build these AI systems, but also like which ones we choose in the organizations that we work. Um, Especially like, it's not necessary that it has to be government organizations. I know we have some people from different Government of Canada organizations, but also like corporations with the services that we provide. Um, so I'd love to open the floor for questions and discussions in the remaining time that we have, whether you're a developer, designer, policymaker, or just someone curious. We invite you to jump in. Are there any questions that have already been asked, Lauren?
We do have one question in the chat. Pamela would like to know what kind of AI tools can we create and use in the workplace to improve accessibility or the accommodation process?
That's a great question. And the one of the things that actually, Pamela, if you are a developer, one of our efforts that we are going to be working on is a AI authoring tool specification. Those of you, I don't know how many of you, maybe you can use the hand raising tool, know of WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and how many of you have participated in WCAG or what ALI efforts, etc. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, of course, are about how do you make web content accessible. So it's technical specifications for what web content should look like when it is accessible. But it's actually part of three standards. So there's a user agent or the browser standard, and there's an authoring tool standard. The authoring tool standard is something that ensures that the authoring tools, right from the beginning, from default, are creating what are called born accessible contents. So the the default production of authoring tools, and of course, most people use authoring tools to create web content, that it doesn't produce inaccessible content. So you don't need to repair it, and you don't need to uh, when you evaluate or you test it, you do still need to test it. There isn't going to be very much that actually needs to be repaired, and that I mean, we've always realized that that is probably the best way to ensure that the content on the web, the content in apps, etc., or the user experience, the interface, is going to be accessible because there are rather than pushing the burden of creating accessible content onto everybody that creates web content. And there's even, examples of where your dog can create web content. You are actually creating the limited number of tools that will automatically produce the content or the accessible content. So what I would invite people to do is to participate in this particular effort to create specifications and exemplars and models for how do we ensure that whatever we create is accessible right from the start so that we don't need to repair it, that our evaluations will show that people with disabilities are not excluded. But other I think creating a test bed for using AI systems, AI assistive technologies would be really great. One of the concerns I have within our university, especially as more and more students are availing themselves of AI for helping with all sorts of things is that if you have a disability, because of the inaccessibility of these systems and because of the financial burden that obtaining these systems often entails, there's inequitable access to it. So creating a way for all employees or all students to have equitable access to whatever supports or AI-based systems would be really great. Samar, you look like you're nodding and you have other advice as well.
Yeah, we actually had a conversation about this just yesterday, and um, one of the things that we noticed is that standards aren't being taught,
Mm,
and so uh, it would make so much sense to almost mandate, if you're teaching web development, teach the web content access guidelines, people go through university 4-year degrees and they have never heard of, the web content access guidelines. And so really, it, the question that we had was like, are these enforceable? Like can these policy guidelines like be enforced? Um, and what would enforcement kind of look like?
right.
Uh,
Yeah.
because like the web content access guidelines are supposed to be enforceable and they're very specific, but yet people don't follow. But d does the country do much about enforcing it? You
Yeah,
know?
and therein lies the dilemma of regulating digital systems, because of course, the in order for them to be easily enforceable and testable, they need to be very techno-specific. And the minute you become techno-specific, you are reducing the ability to change. And of course, these things are moving so quickly, and so frequently accessibility is pitted against innovation, which of course innovation always wins, right? Accessibility is not very well supported by the enforcers, which tend to be government, and government wants innovation. Um, so the one of the things that we've been looking at is how do we create systems that encourage compliance without the need to be highly techno-specific. How do we create incentives and the necessary supports so it becomes easier to actually create something that's accessible than to create something that is inaccessible, uh, or that going directly to the original. I think one of the problems with WCAG has been it does put the burden on the general populace, right? Everybody that is creating web content, all of those small, medium enterprise companies, all of those content creators, the not-for-profits, the private individuals, as opposed to putting that burden on the companies that are creating the tools with which we create the content. And so we want to go upstream to the actual developers. How do we do that? That requires, of course, some participation by someone that has leverage over these large companies. And who has leverage? Both, I mean, the general consumer. So if we can um, try to recruit the general consumer to and make them aware. As you say, education, I think, is a huge part. Awareness of these problems, recruiting people to help with this would be great. Yeah, So, uh, and influencing the larger companies that have a lot of the power and the decision making, who make the decisions about what goes out there and what doesn't. But Samar, you probably have Samar, you probably have some ideas as well. And I'm mispronouncing your name. I'm so sorry.
I told you.
Yeah, I know.
Accept
But I
anything.
have a student who's called
Yeah.
Samar. So
No worries. Yeah, so there are a lot of different possibilities, but it's um what what we were what we were thinking is uh you know we maybe the guidelines might be a little too broad, and it can be misunderstood in different ways. Like one of them, for example, mentioned that we have to involve people with disabilities from the design phase all the way until deployment. Um, you know, in terms of like people with disabilities, it is very broad. And so it's like, how do we involve people with disabilities in a meaningful way,
Right.
uh,
Yeah.
in a cost-effective way as well,
So
you know?
I'm glad you brought up cost because I think there's a um, misunderstanding about the cost of involving people with disabilities. And it goes back to that starburst that I showed. In order to get any new insights or to get any new information from user testing or focus groups or whatever engagement you have of consumers or users, in that middle, you need hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, right? Because they're all going to tell you the same thing. But it only requires a few people out at that edge because they're likely to experience quite a number of the issues that have not as yet been addressed. And so you don't actually, it doesn't actually cost more, it costs less to focus on the people that are having difficulty with the systems that you're developing, not the people that are completely satisfied with what you're doing. Uh,
Yeah, we totally agree. And we thought of ways like, customer discovery,
yeah,
pointing people at like, oh, you know, um, make sure it felt like it would be good to, point people to, what it could look like, what could involving people with disabilities look like. I felt like, that could be a potential, just mentioning,
yeah,
uh,
definitely.
we don't have to mention it in the guidelines. I feel like, we can have,
Yeah, there will be technical support documents.
exactly,
Guidelines
exactly.
are sort of the framework, the skeleton upon which we
Yes.
then add advice and supports and tools that can be used. So our trust meter tool or technical specification will accompany the guidelines. We're also going to be creating a fintech specific system, a cybersecurity specific technical guide. And I think there will be a service design specific guide as well that goes with it. And within the service specific guide or service design guide, will address things like consultation fatigue. Unfortunately, when many people with disabilities have experienced this sort of almost performative or faux consultation where the decisions have already been made and they're brought in to check off, yes, we've consulted with people with disabilities, and it's usually the five usual suspects who all get called in again and again and again, and they're not actually given any agency or determination of what the design should look like or what the decisions are, or even or what the problem is. So the best thing to do is to bring in people who have difficulty with your systems, who are currently experiencing barriers, and people who are missing from your products, and get them to help shape the goal, the problem statement, the challenge statement right from the beginning. Should we be deploying AI here? If we do deploy AI, what are some of the concerns and potential harms, the impact that this will have?
Yeah, very nice. And then I had one question for Cindy. I know you mentioned on-device AI. You mentioned several very key points that a lot of the developers brought up yesterday. One of them was, how to test for bias and all these other things. So obviously, when we're creating the LLMs, it it might be a lot more easier. But when you're using an LLM out of the box, are there any things, that you recommend to keep in mind, or are there tests that we can run, that, you might have resources for, um, to make sure that people are choosing the right LLM?
So in term of choosing a large language model or language model, so it could be small language model. Like for example, the 7 billion model, the Llama 7 billion model, what we choose is actually a small language model. So I mean, I think first of all, you need to understand your needs. You need to understand like you need a large language model which has a powerful and probably provides more accurate output, or a small language model. So nowadays, I think the trend is going towards the small model rather than large model. So there are lots of like concepts of model distillation, so which transfers the knowledge from large language model to small language model for specific task. So for example, if you want to have a model running on user's device and just doing a prediction task, so it probably can do very well if you do the model distillation technique from a teacher model. So in terms of selecting model, it's really, you have to evaluate your requirement and understand what you want. And so that's the first thing like you need to consider when choosing model. So and secondly, you mentioned about how to test model. So when we use a language model, so the first of all, when we want to fine-tune a model, when we want to do anything with this model to customize this model, we need to build our own data set. So the first thing is you need to make sure your data set is balanced. So usually what we do is we examine the key attributes in the data sets, and you can use Python, or there are some other tools out there. So you can evaluate, you can create metrics of how of the distribution of those key attributes. So which helps you understand like which part you need more or more accurate data. So which part is overrepresented, which part is underrepresented. So so reducing the bias in your data set is first thing, is probably one of the most important things to reduce the bias in your whole process. So, and after that, when it comes to the algorithm, you also will write your code to use the data to fine-tune the model. You also need to make sure you reduce the bias from your algorithm. So there's a bunch of fairness testing tool out there. So, but even for even if you don't want you can try with some tools like IBM has their fairness 360 tool, and there are some other tools. And even you don't want to use those tools, you can just use Python to use some visualization tool that helps you to decide like which attributes you want, and to create metrics at the group levels or at the attribute level to help you find out, and you can compare against the baseline threshold. So to help you understand, okay, so is this reaching my threshold in terms of that? So I don't know if I
Yeah, that was really good. Actually, the question was pretty high level. Thank you for explaining all of that for everyone to understand as well. I do use I do use on-device AI. I do use small language models. So yeah, thank you for explaining all of that stuff to them. That definitely will help people understand the answer better. But yeah, I think that uh, answers the question really well. Thank you so much, Cindy.
Yeah, and there's
I
quite a
think,
bit of interesting work currently going on with forms of narrow AI and agent-based systems as well. Yeah.
yes, definitely. Agentic AI is definitely taking off. There's a question by Sean. I think it's um, Lauren. I think he says, I'd like to use AI to determine when to seek first response care. Sean, could you explain the question a little bit?
While we
Sean,
give
wait.
Sean a chance to
Go off mic, yeah, or go on mic.
Yeah, so Sean, you can feel free to unmute yourself or type in your response, whichever you are more comfortable with. In the meantime, we had some great feedback from John Mark in here. He 100% agrees on the importance of customer discovery. The challenge with designing products for a wide customer base like accessibility products is that what works for one person could actually make things worse for another. I learned this firsthand thanks to some value feedback from David Best. So when it comes to gathering feedback, the more the merrier. I think
Exactly.
that's some excellent insight on that one. These are difficult challenges to overcome. So Sean has responded. He is kind of building on Pamela's question. Pamela said, "What kind of AI tools can we create and use in the workplace to improve accessibility or the accommodation process?" So Sean's original question related to using AI to determine when to seek first response care is building upon that original question from Pamela. So if I'm understanding this, Sean, you are interested in using AI to help you make the decision of whether you need to call an ambulance, for example. Yes? Always takes a moment to type that response, and then we get that awkward silence while waiting. For example, or possibly to detect an injury. Hmm.
Yeah, I feel like it's a very generic question. Like, obviously there's so many things that you could do, but you can't make the final decision making, just like any critical task. Usually you keep the critical decision making out of the hands of AI.
Yeah.
But you'd obviously use AI to dumb down some of the statistics, but you would need a lot of like sensors and tools that could collect that data.
Yeah, so and this gets to the work that we've been doing looking at iatrogenic death and illness because it is unfortunately the many of the AI-based medical tools which support evidence-based medicine are in looking at the patterns. The issue with iatrogenic death and illness actually occurred before AI was used so pervasively. The more you have evidence-based medicine where doctors are basing their decisions regarding what to prescribe on larger data sets and not on the individual in front of them, there was a greater preponderance of death and illness for people who were unlike the average. But AI and then insurance companies that are saying they won't fund anything that isn't based on medical calculator data are actually intensifying that. So the point that Samer makes regarding human in the loop, human judgment over the loop, and uh, is a really, really critical one, especially if you're trying to make a decision about somebody that is very different from average. So what might not look like a critical situation for someone that doesn't say have a chronic disability may in fact be something that is uh, something that so get to know the person, the individual themselves, and their judgment is a really critical thing. Don't rely on the AI for uh, various things. So David Best, yeah, using AI alert bracelets. Yes, that may be. And in fact, that's a great suggestion, David, that, hey, don't make a decision about me because I'm not like the average that the AI will assume. Uh, I think that might be something that we should do.
So Sean is agreeing that an operator is very much required for human feedback. And Mark, yes, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you. So I'm a librarian, and one thing I recognize is that at the margin of the starburst is a very small portion of the population whose input is actually needed in multiple places.
Mhm.
So one of the things I think we do is we create standards, publish the standards to guide activity in all the different variety of places it needs to be. But as a librarian, I also observe how standards can be very expensive. And I'm looking at one, tourism and accessible tourism for all. It's an ISO standard. It's 221 Swiss francs, which I think is about $360 for 81 pages. So I'm just wondering, Jutta, if you can comment on the openness of the standards publishing ecosystem, and are
Yeah.
there initiatives to ensure that standard documents are open and accessible for people with disabilities so that they can read the documents that are saying how their lives should be structured?
This has been a lifelong battle that we have had. We have, yeah, unfortunately, ISO, IEC, CSA, all of the major international national standards are not all of them, but the majority of them have a paywall, and they are not only are they do you have to pay for them, but also the supposedly you can get input from your constituency, but if you dare to show the draft to your constituency, then you're in trouble as well. I agree with you, Mark. Luckily, Accessible Standards Canada is committed to open and free standards, and they are actually pushing other countries that wish to participate and collaborate, like the EU, like Senelec, like Etsy and ISO, and the various, and even BSI, if you're going to work with us, this has to remain open and it has to remain free, which is really great. So tell them that you that you support that, so they keep to that. W3C has, of course, made their standards free and open as well. But our All Standards With Us project, what we're trying to do is we're trying to push the accessibility wedge in, to say that anything to do with accessibility should not be charged. I actually was able to assert that with a standard that we worked on a while ago with ISO called Access for All. But what happened there was they did provide it as a public standard, but then they still sold it on their system, so that if you searched for it, you would be directed to their main site, and there you would again be charged for it. So it's a bit of an uphill battle, but I think that is something to advocate for, that things remain free and open. And luckily, ASC is doing that and pushing other countries and also international standards to do that.
That was a great question. Thank you, Mark, for that one. That was part of our discussion last night as well when we were reviewing the draft standard. So it's
Yeah, I was
excellent to see.
literally about to bring up what that. It was in my notes. It was the last I was about to bring up what Mark said. It's a really good point.
Yes, love it. So thank you, Mark, for attending both parts of this topic. We appreciate having you here. So we are down to our final 2 minutes. So we will put out one last call for questions. Type them in the chat while I kind of do the sign off part of things, and then we'll kind of take it from there. So we did have a question in the chat earlier that was just asking if transcripts would be available. So yes, that is the plan. early next week on our website, which is hackf.org. I'll put that in the chat as well. We will be having slides, recordings, handouts from all of our virtual events that happened over the last week. So that will include this one here, unless we've got one of our presenters who's like, you know what? No, let's not share that one, which is valid. If either of you would prefer we don't share the recording, we do not have to. We will share it publicly at least. So yes, keep an eye out. You'll be able to access resources from everything that we did this week. Very happy to have that out there for everyone. We'll also be including that in our newsletter next month. So if you already subscribe to that and you won't remember to check the website, that's another option. You can also sign up for that on our site. So I will be putting that link in there. David saying thank you. Thank you, David. We are very happy that you were here. Sean, thank you for participating. Happy to have had you as part of this conversation as well. Looks like we're not really getting many other questions. So Samer, Dr. Treviranus, Cindy Lee, thank you so much for this event today. This was fantastic. It was wild what I was hearing. I'm not going to lie, some of that was way over my head. I am a project manager that is not as heavily on the technical side, but I still love hearing these things. The way I see it, if I understand everything you're talking about and none of it's new to me, then why am I here, right? So the fact that I didn't understand it and I will now go and look into some of these things a little bit further, I think is excellent. And I hope that other people who attended today got as much out of it as well. Thank you for the work that you're doing in addition to speaking to us here today. It's just amazing that people are working on this side of this new technology, well, new-ish technology. I love that you mentioned that you were working on AI back in the 80s and people are like, yeah, but ChatGPT only came out 2 years ago. What do you mean you were working on it that long ago? So very cool to kind of open up eyes in a number of different ways today. So thank you once again. That does put us at the end of our time, but I want to open it up to our presenters if you have any final words before we close it out.
No, just thank you so much, and please get in touch with us. We'd love your help for advocating, for helping us with some of our development, and we'd love to share resources and keep you in the loop. We have a community list as well, which maybe I can provide that so when things are posted. And there we have discussions, we have community workshops as well. So please become involved and at least keep updated on some of these things.
Sounds amazing. I know I'm going to do that for sure. So we'll get the link for that and include it with the rest of the kind of handouts when we post them next week. So thank you everyone once again. Please enjoy the rest of your afternoon.